this session. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming in and joining in for this session. And of course, as you might have already seen, the session is about OECMs and the green list. We already do, OECMs has come up as a buzzword over the past few years. And recently, as we move towards the WCC, it's expected to also be a very key topical focus, especially when we are trying to come towards the 30 by 30 target. But of course, we realize that target 3 of the biodiversity framework is an ambitious target, and within 5 years, we hope to close that gap. So this session today will look through OECMs as an important role in recognizing conservation actions beyond the non-protected areas. And it also recognizes that conservation actions can either be direct or indirect through OECMs. So the most important bit here is the outcomes and the shared benefits from OECMs. But also we do recognize that the IUCN Green List provides a set of standards that categorize or try to define what good governance of protected and conserved areas looks like. But a common and cross-cutting theme of both is governance. So that means without governance in this case becomes the bedrock of how OECMs should provide the much needed outcomes, but also the focus of the green list standards is also just to ensure that there is effectiveness and there's effectiveness as a result of conservation outcomes of protected and conserved areas as well. So the speakers today will explore a number of case studies and examples from different parts of the world as you get to hear from them. But of course, there will be moments to ask questions, to pose any comments or suggestions, any additions you might have within the chat box. So just keep them coming as the session goes along. And would you mind going to the next slide? But of course, before we begin, there are a few housekeeping rules that we have. Okay, sorry about that.
Sorry,
But of course,
I was just showing the pamphlet. I didn't have a presentation on the housekeeping rules. Sorry.
oh, okay, sure. You can get this coming up again. Okay, just a moment. Sorry, having a few troubles putting the presentation up. Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry about the technical issues we're having. But of course, the few housekeeping rules, as we all know, you would have to stay muted at most of the times as we move on with the session. And with the other, you would have to, if you feel the need to make a contribution directly as the session is going on, you'll just raise your hand and you'll be picked upon. Of the contributions you have for the Q&A segment. And then with the third housekeeping rule is that for any contributions, you can keep them coming through in the chat box. But of course, we shall ensure there's quite some adequate time for the Q&A session, but without taking much more time than we have already contributed. I'll just maybe pass on to Daniel to take it on with his presentation.
Great. Thank you, Aita. And Welcome, everyone. It's a privilege to be presenting to you this afternoon on a Friday. Yeah, my name is Daniel Marnwick. As Isa mentioned, I work for the IUCN Eastern and Southern African Regional Office as the regional coordinator for all things area-based conservation, which obviously includes OECMs, but also the Green List for Protected and Conserved Areas, which is an effectiveness or a standard for measuring effectiveness and equity of management and governance. This presentation really falls under our regional strategy for Target 3 of the GBF, which is called SPACE, which stands for Spaces for People and Conservation Effectiveness. And it really puts people at the center of area-based conservation and the achievement of Target 3. But today I'll be talking to you about inclusive and equitable governance of OECMs, mostly, although I wear a Green List hat as well. Incidentally, I'm based down in Johannesburg, South Africa. I am South African, and OECMs has really become quite a passion of mine. Long before the definition of OECMs was agreed in 2018, and it's found its way back into Target 3. I really felt like OECMs provided us an opportunity to change things around and do things differently. And I'm hoping that that's being realized, although it's taken a lot longer than we may have anticipated. But maybe just to talk briefly about the governance structures as they relate to protected areas and OECMs. Protected areas are established for a very specific reason, and that is to protect the biodiversity at a specific site. And so the governance across most protected areas looks fairly similar, whether it's state or private or co-managed. The governance is set up for the purpose of governing and managing a protected area. Whereas with OECMs, we understand that the OECM term, the whole concept behind OECMs, was to recognize the variety of other conservation that is happening outside of protected areas. And the key word is variety. So what that means is that we are going to see variability, flexibility, and hybridity across the different governance structures that you are going to find at OECMs, because the governance was established for or evolved from a specific land use and the needs for that land use management and governance. So it's going to look fairly different across the variety of OECMs that we're going to find in landscapes and seascapes. And that's okay. But what we need to understand is how we're going to apply a universal concept to a wide variety of different governance structures and extract the information that we need to assess whether it's an OECM or not. So you get the same types of governance structures for OECMs as you do with protected areas. So it can be governed by Indigenous peoples and local communities, or by the private sector, individual landowners, or by government authorities and their parastatals, or through a collaborative governance structure of any three of those. And I've listed a whole bunch of different types of governance structures you may find. The top ones are probably the most relevant to local communities, which is what I'm focusing my talk on here. So local communities or even Indigenous peoples may organize themselves around traditional councils or elders, or set up community development boards or property associations, as is the case in South Africa. We call them CPAs. Or they might establish substructures like resource use forums or resource use cooperatives, like fish cooperatives at many of the sites. They may also fall into some of these other categories, but they largely apply to the private sector or government institutions. So setting up private landholders or title deeds, trusts, company boards, government structures like ministries and departments, parastatals, academic research institutes, and they may even be governed by NGOs or civil society organizations. Regardless of the way the governance structure is set up, there are some fundamental things that we need to understand exists or doesn't exist in that governance structure in order to evaluate it as an OECM. And that is, firstly, is there clear intent and objectives for that for that governance structure that then feeds into the management principles for that site. So have they set clear goals, and can you link those governance and management goals back to the conservation outcomes? And has that been captured somewhere? Is it commonly understood? Secondly is longevity and impact. So is there a mechanism in place that's going to ensure an enduring governance structure that lasts and is going to provide long-term support for conservation? Thirdly, what is the legal underpinning or recognition for that governance structure? So how is it legally recognized in legislation, through trust documents or a constitution, or through traditional knowledge and practice systems? We need to understand, is it legally recognized by its constitution or its constituents? And is that somehow captured somewhere? And then does that allow for the enforcement of bylaws, laws, regulations? Can they effectively enforce that through their governance structure? And that's very closely linked to legality. And then lastly is stakeholder representativity. Does that governance structure represent all the stakeholders in that community? So does it include the resource users, almost most importantly, but also does it include women and youth and other community representative groups? So as we do the OECM assessment, we need to extract information that's going to then answer those questions for us. And there are a number of ways to verify that information once you receive it. The most obvious one is documentation. So in both the Green List and OECMs, we ask for some proof through documentation that those things are in place, like the Constitution, a legal document, an act. How has this been agreed and where is it captured? That's not always that easy, because often the documentation doesn't tell the whole story, or there is no documentation. And I've assessed sites where the traditional governance structures have been in place for hundreds of years, but it's actually never been documented anywhere. It's just understood and accepted. But in order to report an OECM, it needs to somehow be captured. And so documentation can become important. And I think it's important to distinguish between, are we helping communities capture what's already there versus forcing a new model or something upon them that wasn't there already? But that's a different discussion. The other ways of verifying whether these things are in place is the two processes that you actually have to undergo in order to assess a OECM. First is free, prior, and informed consent. So do we have to ensure that the community understands what they're getting into, they understand what OECMs are, and that they then agree and consent to being reported as an OECM. And that FPIC process itself, if done properly, is very telling of the governance structure that's in place at a community. The photo that is there on the slide is an assessment we did in Kenya with a community living next to the Amboseli National Park. And we asked them for a meeting, and we told them what the meeting was about. And it was really just to introduce OECMs. They designed the FPIC process themselves. And what they did is they organized a 2-day meeting. The first day was with community leaders from all the different levels and structures within a community, representing women, disabled people, youth, elders, counselors, and so forth. So we introduced OECMs, explained what they are, and then did what we called a rapid desktop assessment of their site against the OECM criteria. On the second day, the traditional leaders invited the broader community to take part. Again, very representative. We went through the same explanation process, but they then verified the information that was given to us by the community members. So it wasn't a one-sided engagement, and it was very representative of the entire community, which tells me that there's a healthy governance structure in place. And that links closely to the community meetings or the interview process for assessments. Where I've been to other assessments, we've had smaller gatherings, but it's been an open community meeting under a tree where everyone is welcome. And again, I think that's very telling versus an engagement where you're only meeting with the community leaders and no one else is allowed to take part. Obviously, there are a number of challenges that we need to look out for that threaten the governance structures of these sites. First, that the governance authority is not representative and excludes particularly the resource users, but also women and youth. that the governance authority has no ability to enforce regulations. It's there, but they can't enforce regulations. And I've assessed communities where they have all the structures in place, but they've openly admitted that they cannot manage the way that resource users are engaging with natural resources. We may engage NGO or leadership gatekeepers, which restrict access to the rest of the community. There may be internal political instability, or as I said, there may be a lack of documentation to offer as means of verification, and we have to find ways around that. I'm sorry, I didn't check when I started presenting or how long I've been going for, so let me know if I've been going for more than 10 minutes, please. But if I have 2 more minutes, I'll just very quickly show these two sites just to illustrate. So these 2 sites, the one is in South Africa and the other one is Namibia. The Dixie community is a community that lives next to the Kruger National Park between 2 other protected areas, and they use their land for livestock rangeland farming. And they do this in a way that's compatible with the conservation of that savanna bushveld. There's lots of high biodiversity value, but what I wanted to just show you is the governance structure. So they have a traditional authority with traditional leadership, but what they've done is they've strengthened that with a community development forum and a farmers cooperative who sit with the traditional authority and make decisions around natural resource use. And that is what gives the other community members a voice in decision making. They are also supported by a local NGO who's helping them develop management plans and strengthen their governance structures. But the community is responsible for enforcement and management. And the second site is in Namibia. It's a community fish reserve, a very similar setup. They fall between conservancies and national parks in the freshwater system, but they have set up their own community structures such as fish patrols and fish monitors who monitor and enforce any bylaws around fishing. But they've developed additional structures within their governance to ensure that there's joint management of those resources by all the community members. They also have a very specific component in their constitution that talks about equity and the inclusion of women. So this is a very light touch on these two case studies, but just to give you an idea. And maybe just the last thing to say is that at this stage, we've really only assessed, at least in Eastern and Southern Africa, communities that are being supported by NGO partners to help them strengthen governance and management. Now, whether that's a common theme, that it's only communities that are being supported by NGOs that qualify, or whether it's because the NGOs have heard of the OECMs and therefore put those communities forward, I'm not sure. I suspect that as communities become more aware of what OECMs are, they may want to self-assess and report themselves. But at this stage, it's largely communities supported by NGOs. But I think let me end there. Thank you, Aita.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. I didn't notice the 10 minutes were already up. I was just going and getting lost in the case studies. So thanks so much, Daniel, for sharing that. And in case there are any questions, you can keep them. We'll get to them later on. But of course, you can always get them rolling within the chat box. So we'll retrieve them. We'll retrieve them when the Q&A segment comes through. So without taking some more time, we'll have Clara, who will come in and take us through what's happening in the Latin America region. And of course, maybe you can begin by just telling us how your work connects to the presentation you'll be making. And it's 10 minutes here. So over to you, Clara.
Thank you, Aita, and thank you very much to being here with us today. I'm going to talk about some lessons learned in Latin America and the Caribbean regarding OECMs, and I am going to focus a little bit in the Colombian case that I know more. I am, I'm Clara Matallana. I am an ecologist from Colombia. I am part of the Eagle group for the Green List here in Colombia, and also I am part of the OECM specialist group of the IUCN, the World Commission on Protected Areas, and I have been working with this topic for some years. So I'm going to share my presentation, Aita.
Okay, sure, please, it's all yours.
Perfect. So, well, basically, I would like to say that the region, Latin America and the Caribbean region, is advancing on identifying OECMs. Here is the map, the latest map from the WCMC platform, the Protected Planet platform, where the countries upload the information regarding OECMs. And basically, we have now in the region 54 OECMs. The country that have more OECMs reported right now is Colombia, and there are some others on Peru and Ecuador. So the region is working on this in a different manner. Each country is applying the OECM framework in a different pace. So right now, we are having more OECMs uploaded to the platform. So basically, I would like to share with you that last year, we did a meeting here in Latin America, in Lima, Peru, on September, and we gathered 80 people from different organizations, basically NGOs and some representatives of communities. And we talk about a collaborative agenda to support the OECM framework in the region. And basically, we proposed a vision for this agenda, saying that by 2030, Latin America and the Caribbean identify, recognize, and strengthen the spaces called OECMs. And I would like to highlight here that it should be in an effective, equitable, and inclusive conservation way. And in that meeting, we established some topics that need to be enhanced in the region to implement this agenda in all the countries. These are the topics that we talk about, and I would like to highlight two of them that are very important in terms of the equitable and inclusive conservation, and is the free, prior, and informed consent and safeguards, and also the strengthening of governance in reported OECMs. So basically in the region, what we are seeing is in such a diverse region as Latin America and the Caribbean, the implementation of Target 3 is going to be with protected areas that already the region has a lot of protected areas that have been identified and are being strengthening. Also with OECMs, but also with indigenous and ancestral territories that are part of this Target 3. So for this, it's important to understand that we need to differentiate approaches by governance type. We need that the recognition criteria must be applied with varying approaches and level of details, depending on this type of governance. In this moment, most of the OECMs that I show you in the map are currently registered, are government managed, so we need to focus also in other type of governance. And we need to recognize and respect other governance model, especially indigenous people, Afro-descendant communities, local communities, and private actors. So the conclusion is that identification and recognition of OECMs should not alter existing governance arrangements and not impose additional burdens or difficulties to these sites that we already have. So in these two topics for this collaborative agenda, we propose some activities. So in the case of governance, is fundamental to define who are the legitimate stakeholders and who are the persons that take the decisions in the areas. And it's important to understand how are the distributions of costs and benefits under the principles of justice and equity. In the case of Indigenous people, Afro-descendants, and local community, we have to identify and recognize their own forms of conflict resolutions, and customary courts should be considered. So in this case, for the agenda, I'm not going to go through all the activities, but we define in the region some short-term activities and some medium and long terms that has to be with governance. And basically, one of them is to generate tools and guidelines to characterize the diversity of OECM's governance structure in the regions, to be able to recognize all of these differences that we have here in this region. In terms of the FPIC process, it's very important to address how to advance the OECM agenda through safeguards protocols in a transparent and efficient manner to increase the positive impacts of conservation, respecting the will of Indigenous people, Afro-descendants, local community, and stakeholders. So in this topic, in the region, the proposal is to develop a guide on free, prior, and informed consultation and how to implement it on the region, hold some meetings with Indigenous people that are advancing in what is being called the third wave of the Target 3 to the recognition of the Indigenous and traditional territories, and how these complement the protected areas and OECMs. So I'm going to focus on the case of Colombia. Colombia, as I told you, was one of the first countries in the region that start to identifying and reporting OECMs to the WCMC database. So basically, in 2019, some organization of the country proposed a route for the identification, analysis, and report of the OECMs, basically identifying some potential OECMs that we all have already know in the country that could meet the criteria. Then having an analysis by the application of the criteria of the OECMs with the stakeholders and right holders, and analyzing the information that we gather, identifying some aspects also that needed to be strengthening in these areas. And also the country proposed a route for reporting the OECMs at the WCMC database that involve some organizations and involve some people that verify if the areas complied with the criteria to be reported as OECM. So we had these adapted guidelines for the country that we work in some pilot cases. And as a result of this process, Colombia in 2022 reported 55 OECMs. We went to having 3 first areas reported to 55 in 2022. And basically what I want to tell here is that it was an important thing to do for the country, but it also left with a lot of lessons learned regarding how was the process. In this case, most of the areas were reported as public governance. Some of the difficulties that we identify is that it was not very easy to identify the type of governance of some of those areas, and it was difficult to link the governance structure to the conservation and the long-term criteria of the OECMs. In some of the areas, it was a lack of FPIC process and also a lack of biodiversity information, and there was not monitoring of the biodiversity on those areas. So as a result of this process, Colombia implement a project that allowed to strengthen the reporting route, the identification and reporting route of OECMs. And two of the objectives were to obtain a guide for the FPIC process. So this guide proposed the use of the FPIC for ethnic groups and a simple consent for other local stakeholders. What we notice here is that it's a little bit different when we are working with ethnic groups that with another groups, such as other local communities in the region that with a simple consent form is okay to have their permission to go through the process of the OECM reporting. So this guide provides a step-by-step guide on how to carry out the consent process and the elements it should include for presentation during the nomination process to be more transparent. And also with this project within the framework of the collaborative agenda for Latin America and the Caribbean, there was some discussion and exchange of experiences for this proposal that we have for the region to strengthening this aspect of all the process in all the countries. Also, other of the issues that we had to strengthen here in Colombia was the governance. So as I mentioned earlier, it was sometimes difficult to identify the type of governance in the right way. So perhaps some of the areas that were reported as public governance, they were actually shared governance or community-based governance. So we built this, sorry, it's in Spanish, but we built this decision tree that helps to identify with questions if we are talking about a public governance, a community-based governance, an NGO or private company governance, or a private people or families that own some areas that are being considered as OECMs. So this will allow to understand better if the governance is by the government, is a private governance or share or collaborative governance or a community-based governance. Also, we developed a methodology to analyze the governance based on some principles that allow the stakeholders to understand better what are they doing about this aspect of the process as a part of the application of the OECM criteria. And basically, it allows to understand what they have learned from the conservation process and the governance of the process, how they can use what they have learned about how is the governance structure and the process, and how could it be improved in the future, how can improve the governance structure in the future and strengthen the governance, because it's very linked with the positive results that we are going to have in each of the cases related to OECMs. So basically, there is an important opportunity of the OECM framework in the region. We know that it could identify areas that are conserved but are not included right now in the protected area systems. Also, it allows to recognize the roles of the community, private owners, and local governments in the conservation that are not right now also included in protected area systems. And it helps to increase representative and connectivity of protected and conserved area systems. Allows to evaluate the effectiveness of different conservation strategies, and it allows to include the recognition of these areas of these OECMs on environmental policies. I want to make a last conclusion about the green list. Applying the green list standards to OECMs could be possible, but it will require a deep analysis and understanding. is an important standard with some indicators that could be included, but because we have very different types of governance structures, we will need to have indicators that are for each kind of governance type that we have in the OECMs. Okay, that it was my last slide. Thank you very much, and I will hear any question that you have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Clara, for putting that through. Well, interestingly, that I wouldn't notice that went over time, although it did. But thanks so much for putting that across. And yes, I see the questions are coming through in the chat box, so just keep them flowing. We shall revisit them later on. And maybe for the speakers, just take note of the questions as well, so you can maybe respond to them when that session comes. So we'll have Hesti. Hesti will take us through what's happening on the other side of the world as well. Over to you, Hesti.
Thank you, Aita. Okay. Good day, everyone. I'm Hesti Widodo from Indonesia. I'm currently working for Coral Triangle Center as Senior Technical Marine Consultant, and also I'm the PU Marine Fellows 2025. I've been, I think, involved in the OECM discussions since 2014 when we talked together with the ICCA, and also joining the Indonesia working group on OECM. Glad to join everyone. And also I got chance also to learn a little bit on green list and doing the crosswalk analysis for the green list standard over some of the MPA management effectiveness tools. So tonight I will share the experience, our lessons from Indonesia, but also I will touch a little bit on the Coral Triangle, where is it located. So in the Coral Triangle, we've been looking at this as a motion to support the 30% by 2033. And in the CTI discussions, everything has already been translated that the 30% should be included marine protected area and other effective area-based conservation measures. And when you are where is the Coral Triangle area? This is the dark red area in the Asia. It's covering the 6 countries, and this is where the people say the bullseyes of marine biodiversity. And I will go back and forth in this my discussion, sharing experience from Indonesia, also a little bit on in the Coral Triangle, and to also put the context. Indonesia is the governance type of the coastal marine resources, and also the terrestrial one is actually led by the government. So everything should be decided by the government, including the MPA and all the coastal marine resources. And Indonesia itself, in the beginning, we set the target for 10% of marine area by 2030. But then we also support Indonesia MPOECM Vision 2045 to target 30% by 2045, because we're talking about 97.5 million hectares. And for Indonesia government, there's already like a guideline why we should go into the MPA and OECM direction in supporting this conservation effort. And this is the document just recently launched in July that Indonesia government support the MPA and OECM achievement by 30% by 2045. And this is a location that we mapped out together, the MPA OECM consortium, looking at this side that we also have themes for the marine protected area, for the biodiversity protection, for the climate change, and also for the small scale fisheries. And also this is interesting exercise when we talk about the OECM, the potential marine OECM Indonesia that covering almost 10.2 million hectares. And if you look at in this map, in this area, the one that next to Papua area is the one having the highest potential marine OECM in Indonesia. And lots of discussion and discourses about like, should we go but to have only MPA, focusing on MPAs, because it has the standard and it's clear procedure how to identify reporting, and also we have the ministries also working on this. But sometimes people also try to find out where we should put the MPA and where we should put the OECM. And lots of discussions because people are still, I think the awareness is not yet there. So people still questioning whether the MPOECM are two different things. But actually we're talking about all the conservation effort, whether the purpose is not the first or the primary, or the and OECMs is actually the secondary one. And this is, I just put the context also for Indonesia, how we translated the marine protected area and also how we translate it into the OECM. In Indonesia, we call it kawasan berdampak konservasi or conservation impact area. This is to differentiate with the kawasan konservasi perairan or aquatic conservation area. And when we talk about this, for marine OECM in Indonesia, this also covered the inland waters. So this is interesting. Maybe in other area, it's really looking at the small islands or the coastal area. And also just currently also in the Philippines, Timor-Leste, and Malaysia, the effort to adopt the OECM, implement OECM has already started. The Philippines has already started also having this OECM, identifying some of the watershed and also the ICCA's location as potential OECM. While in Malaysia, there's actually national policy depicting the need to adopt the OECM through the National Policy on Biological Diversity 26 and 2025. And how actually OECM looked as a new jargon or as a new term, but whether it is actually occurring on the ground. And from the lessons in Indonesia, we saw some of the opportunities. Our community has already practices this kind of process. There's taboo or sacred area, and there's also sasi maybe in Indonesia, which is quite common to understand, and also locally managed marine areas. And we also have marine reserve. We also have context fish bank here. And also we also have customary indigenous area of our coastal resources management. And we also identified in this process of identifying OECM in Indonesia, there's a challenge in terms of recognizing the tenure system for the coastal marine. In Indonesia legal context, only those who are identified and legally recognized as customary or indigenous people can have rights over coastal and marine resources. The rest will need to be governed by the government. And we also identify the potential OECM, marine OECM in Indonesia that will be established and also recognized. Mostly those who are the customary one and also the local community managed area can be potentially recognized as OECM. And mostly those area are the sustainable fisheries area, which is a small scale area happens in an area. They have seasonal closures, and they also have set aside certain location as permanent closures. And the effort of this identifying marine OECM in Indonesia is actually also goes beyond the understanding that this is an area-based conservation effort. And because we also see this as a part of inclusion participation, but also to promote non-state actors. We call it like that because in Indonesia, as I mentioned, the governance type is actually the government lead all the marine resources, coastal marine resources, and also the terrestrial. And we also started off looking at this guideline where we should have OECM. And we follow this process. And also in this, it is interesting when we look at the IUCN Green List, this is one of process to certified marine protected area commonly, but also there's the idea to have this also for ECM. And the good governance component, thank you, Daniel has already gone through this one too for the good governance component on guarantee legitimacy, achieve transparency, and enable governance. In Indonesia, this year we start applying IUCN Green List standard for our MPA, and we are still learning about it. And there's the process in the Coral Triangle to have also the EAGLE or Expert Assessment Group of the Green List. And we also look at from this component of the good governance that might be also challenging for implementation in Indonesia. We also see the challenge will be on the governance structure, how the inclusive, the engaging women and those marginalized group, and to recognize the right holders and the stakeholders. This is also another thing that we need to consider when we want to engage more community to also buy in with the concept of OECM. The free prior informed consent, we are still working on that. Some of the discussion on OECM is still happening at the national level, while the community is still just doing whatever they're doing now for LMMA, for the Fish Bank. And also this is to provide also the context. In Indonesia, the governance authority over territorial, it's actually within the provincial government. But for the internal waters, it is by the district government. So different kind of structure in the governance, also challenging for the community to take part. Who should recognize, who should certify, or who should having the authority to promote this OECM, to recognize the rights of the community in taking care of coastal marine resources. Another thing is actually on the marine spatial plan in Indonesia, for the marine protected area, it is designated in the conservation zone within marine spatial plan. But then we're talking about OECM that provide conservation impact, not only the area, but it's also having a functions to provide the conservation impact. This is also the discourse that we are still having now in Indonesia. And another things that actually highlighted also from Daniel, also from Clara presentation earlier, that the green list standard requires robust scientific evidence and data to verify. Lots of the information that we gather from the local community, the proven biodiversity value and conservation outcomes is actually hard for them to understand. Some of the standards require the robust scientific evidence, and the method is quite high. And for the community, all the information about their governance mechanism, the regulations, the agreement is actually the oral process. And we are looking at this as actually another opportunity to also build the capacity of people. And then currently also in Indonesia, we don't have yet the guidelines for identifying OECM. We're still working on this. And then this is sort of the diagram on the left, actually showing the proposed steps to identify an OECM, which is one, it should be outside of the marine protected area. So if it is MPA already declared, if it is like located in or outside or around area of MPA, it is allowed. But if it is like already declared as MPA, there's no possibility to be called as OECM. And then we also adopt this geographically defined, so we know there should be like boundaries set aside of the area. And the third step, we to assess this, they have to have governance, active governance, and functional governance systems. Number 4, if we want to have the OECM that have dampak konservasi or conservation impact in a positive way and sustainable and really proven. 5, to get support from the community. 6, actually to provide the socioeconomic and local custom. And when we identify this process, we see there's potential to just go through the process of identifying the potential area, make into the candidate, and then assign or recognize as an OECM. This is typology of the for the OECM for marine that can be potentially managed by local communities, private sectors, government outside of the Marine Ministry, Marine Affairs and Fisheries, but also the research institutes. But then what to consider next when we go about adopting the green list or working on with the community and having this OECM recognized and reported? We have to make sure for Indonesia context, at least the legal status and designated area in Indonesia in terms of marine spatial plan. And also we need to bridge the gap of a capacity to measure the success, not only from the national level, but also from the community to understand the process, but also provide like insights from their perspective. Mechanism to identify, verify, and also reporting OECM still a way to go, especially also the process to get acknowledgement or to get okay from the community for them to be recognized in OECM. Engaging private sectors is another opportunity also to look at in this one. We also learned from Japan that mostly the OECM is actually from the private sectors to take lead. And we also, in that process of having the guideline of OECM Indonesia, we look at the potentially being also mechanism to finance the initiative. And also we understand for the local community to adopt the higher technology is also hard, but then maybe we can find innovative applicable technology to use by the local community, the remote islands, and adopted. That's it from the lesson from Indonesia. Let's row the boat and make conservation happen on the ground. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hesti, for giving as much detail as possible. And I think the perspectives you bring in are from, we are so much used, many of us are on land, but there's also a side to what happens in the marine space. And I think what you've shared is an eye-opener on what happens with the marine protected areas and how the OECM concept can also fit into that. So I think it's, as of now, we shall be getting on to the last speaker who will be giving more of a wrap-up thought, but also sharing some of his perspectives. But kindly do keep the questions coming through as well in the chat box. Keep them coming through because they'll also be addressed after this last session. So Stephen, I'll pass it on to you to, share with us what you have prepared.
Yes, good morning, everyone from Canada. At least my morning, and good day to the rest of you. I thought my job here was not to provide a set of slides, but to provide a bit of wrap up. I'll introduce myself. I'm the co-chair, or the chair rather, of the Green List Standards Committee, and I'm the co-chair of the OECM Specialist Group of IUCN. So I have my feet firmly planted in these worlds. I think it's important to realize what the Green List is in relationship to OECMs, and the relationship might be a bit tenuous. When we developed the Green List version 1.1, which is everybody is using now, we wanted it to apply to not only protected areas, but also to conserved areas. And globally, we still have a challenge with understanding what the term conserved area means. I think there's strong agreement that it applies to OECMs, but whether or not it applies to other sites, such as indigenous territories, is still being debated inside. Certainly inside the CBD, and we're waiting for a CBD decision on that. To get to target 3, we have for sure 2 mechanisms. We have protected areas and OECMs, and the world's struggling with OECMs. I think, as you all know, it took the CBD parties 8 years to come up with a definition of OECMs, after it was first mentioned in 2010. So in decision 14.8, we have a definition and criteria agreed to by parties. And in that same decision, IUCN was asked to provide additional guidance on OECMs, which we've done. We've created this guidance document, which was published last year, and we've also provided a site-level assessment tool, which was published the year before, and it is available in 10 languages globally. The guidance document is only now available in English and just out in Spanish, and we're looking to make it accessible in more languages as well. So they provide clear guidance on the criteria as were decided by the parties. And so, listening to Hesti do a further adaptation for Indonesia on the criteria, what we're trying to do as IUCN is to make sure that all of those criteria are followed right through to the regional adaptations of guidance. And they include, of course, having a boundary, having a strong enough mechanism, but also locating these areas in areas of importance for biodiversity. And that's quite specified in Decision 14.8 and quite specified in the IUCN guidance. We're not looking for anywhere that has some biodiversity. We're looking for areas that are important for biodiversity. And in the Decision 14.8, it's described as rare and endangered ecosystems, rare and endangered species, species with high ecological integrity, seasonal concentrations such as spawning aggregations or migratory stopovers. Those kinds of things are the areas that we're looking to protect so that we can help bend the curve on biodiversity loss. So the green list is basically a standard for well-run protected areas. That's what it was designed for. How it applies to OECMs really needs some additional thinking. We're in the process now of coming up with Green List Standard 2.0. We'll be launching that at the World Conservation Congress in Abu Dhabi in a couple of weeks. When we did a global survey, we interviewed experts all over the world, whatever, there was a concern that the green list really doesn't apply to the full range of OECMs. It certainly can apply to the full range of protected areas, all governance types, but it probably doesn't apply to the full range of OECMs. So the exact overlap between the green list and OECMs is still to be determined, I think. We have one OECM in the green list right currently from France, and it's essentially run as a small national park. So it wasn't a huge stretch. So I think that those areas of OECMs that have conservation as a first declared priority may fit quite well with the green list, but others, such as military reserves or fishing closures, they might not fit because they don't have the documentation required that's required of the green list, for example. So that's important to figure out. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't focus hard on making sure these OECMs are effective as possible. And there are tools in addition to the green list to make that happen. The green list guidance provides a whole bunch of standards for what the green list, what OECMs can be and should be, and we're working hard as a union to make sure those are rolled out globally. They apply to all ecosystems, to freshwater, marine, and terrestrial. So there's no difference there. There is some additional guidance from FAO on fisheries management areas. These are mostly fisheries closures that might be potential OECMs, but that guidance is very complementary to and not contradictory to the IUCN guidance. So in Green List 2.0, there's a bunch of improvements made, and hopefully we can find a way to provide some guidance on which OECMs or which kinds of OECMs it might apply to as we go forward, and people are interested in using the ideas in the green list to make sure that OECMs are going to be as effective as possible. I think what we all want to do, and what Hesti mentioned, we're trying to do on the ground conservation, that's our focus. And we want these tools not to confuse people, but to make sure that they contribute to standardized, effective, and equitable conservation on the ground. So I will stop there, and hopefully there's some questions and discussions for both me and others. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stephen, for setting a big deal of clarity to what OECMs are, and also trying to draw a line on areas where OECMs could also overlap with green lists. And I believe there are a lot more questions that are now coming up following the remarks by Stephen. And right about now, we'll just be getting into a question and answer session where if you would want to ask some of the questions you had brought up earlier on, you can, maybe the speakers can respond to them already. I know some of them were responded to in the chat, but if you would like to just respond to them directly as well.
So would you like me to go through the chat and answer questions that have popped up, or do you want to moderate that?
Okay, maybe Daniel, if Daniel could start with, there are some questions that were posed, if you would like to respond to them. I see you had also responded by chat, but I was wondering if you wanted to directly respond.
It's just that one question, right, around land tenure. Yeah, I mean, if I understood the question correctly, it was a question around land tenure and how that impacts governance, and it's a very good question. A few countries, at least in Africa, don't allow land tenure except by governments, so that becomes tricky. In those countries where we've assessed OECMs and communities don't have legal land tenure, what we're thinking of doing, we haven't done it yet, is to develop a manifesto, because it's the same communities that haven't documented the governance structure either. So to help them construct a manifesto that describes governance over their land and management objectives, and to get the community leadership to sign that, but also to get local government structures to sign that as well, so that there's local government buy-in to what's in that manifesto. But it's going to look different for every country. But you're right, that is really a big issue that we have to work around, and short of changing national legislation, which isn't always that quick, we'll have to think quite creatively. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. I think something that has been consistent is just about how governance structures do play out at the national level, and even moving down to the community scales. And that's basically trying to unpack here as well. Thanks, Daniel, for adding that. Hesty, I see Clara left already, but Hesty, would you like to directly respond to any questions that came up addressed to you?
Yeah, thank you, Aita. I think I will also respond. Rodrigo, I think in the chat box asking about what is the incentive for the communities. This is one of the discussions from the early beginning when we talk about this OECM Indonesia in 2019. As we go back also the governance structure, this is the ratification of the CBD is actually, it will be contributed more for the Indonesia government to report it to the WDPA of the support to the achievement of the 30%. But also we see this in an opportunity and discussions that the recognition part of the local communities of resources management. So sort of like that kind of that's already an incentive for the local community to get recognition by the government. The next one also, there's a question whether how the mechanism to support local community to bring up to get recognition and on their governance system, but also to get support as an adaptation, as a process, so as to be recognized in OECM. So that kind of process is sort of like two ways process, and to open up the opportunity for local community to get support. And also, yes, like thank you, Stephen, to also remind us again that for the both MPN and OECM, we want to have it as an in situ biodiversity conservation. It's not merely only like whatever area, it should be still going into the high biodiversity area. And this is we are still working on that, getting agreement, also how to really report it, and how is the mechanism for the local communities also to get the benefit of this process. But whatever happening at the national level for Indonesia, at the local communities, we are still supporting their exercise. And in some area, major area like in Maluku, as the government also recognized their role to identify and recognize the customary indigenous locations, they really support the process for identifying OECM maybe in the future. And as an option, also the MPA, as MPA actually provide them, it's the pattern, the, how do you call it? The recipe is actually already fixed. So NS is actually by the local government see the opportunity as participation and shared governance from the national to the provincial government. I think that's my my response to the question, and thank you also. With HP, this one is from the Nepal. Yeah, we're to also exercise and learn about the green list, but we also have in mind that green lists can serve as diagnostic tools for us to reflect how best that the governance component is actually applicable in Indonesia. And also we're also exercising this also to use in Timor-Leste. That's from my
Okay.
side, Aita and Stephen. Thank you.
Okay, I see a comment from Rodrigo. Okay, I think you answered it quite well. But of course, in case there are any other questions, you can always bring them up, and then yeah, we'll see how to forward them as well. Stephen, I'm not sure if you got the question, if you might, maybe the questions were not directed to you at the start, but you might have, maybe there are one or two that you might have seen. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
no, there's a question directly to me, which I will respond to.
Okay.
But before I do that, I want to just add into Daniel's comments on land tenure, which is a really important discussion. In developing OECMs, when it was decided in the middle of the night in Japan in 2010, when the Aichi targets were made, the idea was that OECMs would be recognized, right? That these were areas that were already delivering on conservation outcomes, and what we had to do was to recognize that effort. And people were mostly thinking about Indigenous communities, Indigenous local communities, and fisheries closures. There were really two camps in the room. But since that time, there is quite a movement to actually create OECMs, right? Not simply recognize existing actions, but to create OECMs. And lots of countries in the world are developing bespoke legislation or modifying legislation so that issues of land tenure and governance mechanisms are much clearer, so they can create OECMs. And I think that's an important movement. We've been trying to track the number of countries that have actually developed legislation around OECMs, and I'm not sure if we're doing a perfect job, but it's about 15 countries we're aware of so far in the world. So that's important. This is an opportunity for countries, if they want to use the OECM tool to report progress towards target 3, they can, there's all kinds of ways to strengthen the governance mechanisms and strengthen land tenure arrangements in order for that to happen. So that's just adding in on to Daniel's comment. And then there was a question from, see if I can find it here. Anyway, it was a question of do OECMs essentially all have to meet green list standard? And that hopefully is what this webinar is trying to clarify. And the answer is a clear no. Just like protected areas, OECMs do not have to meet the green list standard. The green list standard is an optional certification system from IUCN, where individual countries, individual protected areas can apply to see if their management and outcomes meets a globally agreed upon standard. And if they do, they receive certification from IUCN that they've actually met the green list standard. The green list standard can be used outside the certification process. It can be used as simply a tool for self-assessment. And IUCN's working right now on on a companion tool, they'll call the Green List Assessment Tool, which can be applied to any OECM or any protected area without having to go through the long involved process of getting certified and setting up an eagle and all that kind of stuff. So there's a couple of ways to use the Green List, but all protected areas and all OECMs certainly do not have to meet the Green List standard. OECMs must meet the criteria laid down in Decision 14.8 and then further elucidated by IUCN. They should meet those if they're going to report them to the World Database on OECMs. And there's some checking going on to make sure countries do that. But remember, we have a voluntary system. The CBD is without enforcement mechanisms. So if countries report bad stuff as OECMs to the World Database on Protected Areas, there is not there's no police that can say, no, you can't report that. It doesn't meet the criteria. There is moral suasion. There are researchers and IUCN specialist groups that can go back to the country and say, actually, did you think about this or did you think about that? But this applies to protected areas as well. There's lots of junk in what's reported globally in the 350,000 protected areas, which are reported under the World Database on Protected Areas. So I hope that's clear.
Okay, thanks so much, Stephen. I think there was a question that came up, maybe it was directed to you, Stephen, but a number of materials have been shared in the chat box about where you can get to know more about the Green List standards, and then also management guidance on OECMs, and there's a lot more that you can go on and dive into. Okay, I'm not sure if there are any other questions that have come through. I think there was one that came through for Stephen while you were presenting.
Well, can you read it out if I can't find it?
I think it's there's this on women involvement.
Yeah, if you could read it out, that would be great.
Oh, okay. Okay, so looks like we have two here. So one was about policies in place to ensure women are involved in conservation globally, and are they given opportunities in OECMs to ensure inclusion and equity? So that's the first question from Funke. And I think another one also just came through. Yeah, maybe if you could begin with that.
So on the question of gender and gender equity, I mean, not only is it spelled out in the Global Biodiversity Framework that we have to up our game in terms of being inclusive for gender equity and involvement of all genders in the work of our conservation. It's very explicitly laid out in the Green List Standard that women should be included in advisory boards and decision-making bodies, in staff outcomes, etc., and that there be equal opportunity given. Furthermore, that women's voices should be listened to when you do things like set up conservation outcomes. What are you really trying to protect in these places? It may be that that different kinds of harvest occurs in a community that's done by women, and it would be often ignored in the establishment of the conservation values of these places. So that's very much included in the Green List Standard, and is, to Jens' comment on elaboration on the additional value of the Green List, that's the kind of value that the Green List brings to thinking about protected areas and OECMs, because that kind of detail is not included in Decision 14.8 on OECMs, for example. So gender inclusiveness, climate change, thinking about climate change and how these places that we're setting aside as either protected areas or OECMs, they're all going to be affected by climate change. We all know that they're being affected now. So we have to account for that in our thinking about them and our management. What are we going to have? What are we going to have in the future? The idea of adaptive management, which is a key part of the green list that we have to learn by doing, and not only and embrace adaptive management in the way that we structure our decision-making systems. For example, those are just some of the values of the green list. One of the things the green list requires is the use of thresholds. So let's say you want to protect a population of fish, okay, as in a marine protected area. When do you know whether you're going to be successful? You know, how many fish, what fish size distribution. There's a whole lot of biological things which can be included in understanding the goal of protecting a population of fish of species X, for example. The green list provides a whole lot of thinking on how to set thresholds around those conservation goals. So there's many, many values to the green list which aren't in the OECM guidance or even protected area guidance that are complementary and can really help benefit people as they do on the ground conservation work. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for stating the additional context, Stephen. I see you've quite been on fire over the past few minutes. But of course, we're almost wrapping up. We just have a few more minutes to the end of the session. But of course, I'll just give one last opportunity for each of the speakers. Maybe you can keep it to about a minute each for any final thoughts or comments you would want to make, just so before we wrap up. And you can go in any order. Or Hasty, would you want to go first? Then Daniel comes in.
I think from my side, I see OECM as an opportunities. This is the way forward for us to bring the participation, as we discussed from the beginning when we talk about OECM. And OECM is actually one of the conservation effort that we have to make and justify the process to make it the proven one. But then we also need to think about the capacity component, that how to bring in looking at the governance structures, also how to bring the two sides of the government and community to work together toward the same understanding and to verify something. At the end, we want to make sure that our resources, coastal marine resources, or the terrestrial one, is actually providing the benefit not only for the biodiversity itself, but also for the people that lives with that. So from that end, also having the green list is actually another mechanism for us to get like certified in the context that getting the recognitions. I think that's one of another thing of having the green list standard. But also from the process that we exercise here in Indonesia, the green list also serves as diagnostic tool, as Stephen also mentioned. We can do now the self-assessment of the green list, whether we are looking at ourselves in the global context where we are now. So this is good reflections to move forward to make sure that we provide the real conservation impact on the ground that's sustained. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Hasty, for sharing that. Daniel, would you want to jump in next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Aita. And thanks to all the presenters. It's been really useful even for me. And I don't have a lot to add to what's already been said. I mean, I could say so much on OECMs alone and the potential that they could hold. And that potential really is going to be unlocked in how they identified and strengthened at country level. But I think when looking at OECMs and the green list together, you know, Stephen touched on this, and I think there's a dual pronged value add, if you want, to both of them, in that they are both essentially standards to measure conservation effectiveness at sites. And so what we're seeing, what I've seen with the green list and now with OECMs, is it's very seldom that sites tick all the boxes, straight away. You often identify gaps that need to be strengthened before they can meet that. And so it really is an opportunity to use both tools for that purpose, to strengthen sites' governance, management, and conservation outcomes. And it really depends on the depth at which you want to dive when you're doing that. So OECMs really provides kind of a minimum standard for what would qualify as effective area-based conservation. The green list provides a global benchmark, almost like a gold star of what we want out of protected areas, especially as Stephen said. And then once you achieve that, you get the due kudos and recognition. So I think these tools are all valuable for different purposes, and it all depends on how we use it at the end of the day. Yeah, I think let me really end there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Daniel, for adding on to that. And well, I think Stephen, you come last, and I think that will be it. That will be it for the session today.
Yeah.
What is
the only thing I would add in the end of this, which I think is really an important conversation, is let's not forget about protected areas as we think about rolling out our response to meeting target 3. There's a lot of excitement with OECMs, but there's also some myths about OECMs. And there was a good paper recently which talked about the myths around OECMs. And one of the myths is that they're cheaper and easier to put in place. They account for more governance types, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want in any way diminish what I see as, I think we all see as the potential of OECMs. But as we think through our response to Target 3, we don't want to only do it with OECMs. We want to do it with protected areas and OECMs. Protected areas are, remember, protected areas can include all governance types. They're not government protected areas. They can be private. They can be Indigenous and local community-led or mixed. And that gives a lot of potential. So a lot of the sites that we're thinking about as OECMs might be better protected as protected areas, because legislation and tools and traditions we all have around protected areas can be used to protect these places. So I guess when we're thinking about OECMs and the green list, we should think about OECMs, protected areas, and the green list as an important context. And the last point I'll make is that many places that people are thinking about as OECMs are sustainable use areas. And we have a target, it's called Target 10 in the Global Biodiversity Framework, that there hasn't been nearly enough attention paid to. So many of these sites are better reported under Target 10 than under Target 3 if they're truly large-scale sustainable use areas. So those are my closing comments, and thanks very much all.
All right, thanks so much, Stephen, and everyone else, and all the other speakers, including everyone else who has been able to attend from the start to the end. And we just have a few seconds left before we conclude, and I should say this has been great. I want us to all think about this as an eye-opening discussion, because there's a lot more out there about OECMs and the green list, but also to recognize that these are governance arrangements precisely. So Yen has done a great job of sharing lots of materials that you can go through, but I can go an extra mile to compile them and then share by mail, so you'll also have access to them. Otherwise, I think that's it for now, and thanks everyone once again. So one more thing, if many of you enrolled as guests, but you can also sign on to IUCN Engage. It's a very interesting community, professional community to engage with. And also, if you wish to join the commissions at stages, there's also a form included in the mail. You can just sign up there for when the membership opens for the commissions as well. And yeah, see you in the WCPA when the next membership opens. For now.
Thanks, Aita.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Great
everyone.
discussions.
Bye.
See you again, Steve.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Stephen. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Yan. Bye, Aita.
Bye, Steve.
Catch up
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.